hoping we are doing well.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. If you can hear me, clap once, twice. Hug a person next to you. Hug the air if there is no one. Okay, welcome to day 2 of the People Living with HIV Leadership Summit. It's been a great day yesterday, I think. Or how are we feeling? One word, how are we feeling? Inspired, great, huh? Energized, resilient, hopeful. No one is tired, motivated. There is no tired. Exciting. Okay, so I'm understanding that you need to be reminded some things, otherwise there will be a crisis. If you remain here, we are a very beautiful country and we can keep you here comfortably. And this is Kenya. Things happen either, one way or another, but things always happen. However, we don't want you to remain here. So, unless, you have to remain the proper way. Not because you were left by your flight and now we don't know what to do. Listen from Nelson a bit about what we need to do in terms of our logistics going back home. And then we are having a very, very important panel. We are going to be joined by friends from UNAIDS, colleagues in the sustainability. I just know when I see Jaime, Charles, and Melissa, I know we are talking sustainability and the roadmaps, but we are going to talk about that with a mind towards sustainable financing. And then we are going to listen from Chai, who released a HIV market memo last week. You can Google, or I think some of you have it in your emails. Maybe it's sitting there unopened, but we will listen from them about that and listen from a beautiful panel of very, very inspiring leaders in the room about how do we organize financing. Then we will go for break. Then we will go into our community groups. Young people, go young people yourself and come out of there with young people next steps, a young people position. Even if it's one thing you are agreeing, young people, can I feel you?
Yes,
women living with HIV, you will go into your room and have your women living with HIV specific positions, next steps, etc. Can I feel the women?
Yes.
People living with HIV, largely men, will stay. Men living with HIV and others that feel like, and others who are men, and others who are not women but people, will also go and do people living with HIV conversations. Once we do that, the afternoon part, after lunch, is important because we are going to do our people living with HIV consultation on the global AIDS strategy. We're very, very lucky to be able to do that in person. So we will host one consultation here. We are hoping to host one on sustainability online, but the one we will host here is on treatment. So please be here because we are going to give our input to the global AIDS strategy development process, and I think we'll hear a little bit more about that as the team from UNAIDS are here with us today. So that's the plan for the day. In between, we will take pictures and hang out and say many things, but again, please bring in the same energy and the spirit you had yesterday. I also feel inspired that we are all in this room. Thank you very much. And over to you, Nelson. Yes, question.
Is it possible to have positive faith? A group? Even if there are 2 or 3 or 4, but from the faith sector, especially like the ones the WCC sponsored.
Yeah, because I think in other consultations later on,
Cross-cutting.
we can, but
I think
now we just follow
Yeah, let's follow this first, and then we can go into the different groups, so that we start from here first, and then, okay? All right.
Thank you, Florence. Actually, Florence has said it. Nairobi is beautiful. We promised the rain. We promised cold. We promised the sun. Today is sunny. The cold, which is actually our winter. Winter happens in the evening and in the morning. And now it is summer. But why I'm here is to remind us that for those who are leaving, you probably need to check your tickets. You probably need around 3 hours, because 2 hours at the airport and then 1 hour in between here. But that is not to chase you away, not to create panic. But what is important is that you are properly scheduled, and Born, our colleague, is seated. You can stand so that they see. He is seated outside there. If you have any doubt on travel, because he's the one scheduling taxis for those who are leaving, he will be working on that very fast so that we don't miss. And I'm saying this because I know some of you are having connecting flights, which actually sometimes is problematic if you miss here. So thank you very much, and welcome to day 2, and enjoy the day. I hand over to the lead for today. Thank you. And a clap for me for reminding you that you have to leave.
So good morning, colleagues. Happy Friday. It's another day as we continue our deliberations, and Florence has already kickstarted the process. I'll just take it up from there. So let me introduce myself. I'm the moderator for today until such a time when Kenley will take over for the closing ceremony. For the closing ceremony, that is, yeah, you are somewhere on the program. So my name is Charity Nkona. I'm coming from Malawi. That's where I'm based. I'm the current board chairperson of International Steering Committee of ICW, International Community of V. I'm also a member of UNITAID Community Delegation representing women living with HIV. I'm also a CCM Oversight Committee member in my country, Malawi. And I am the National Coordinator of ICW chapter in Malawi. And previously, I've also served in the advisory group of UN Plus. That time I was working with United Nations, so I've served as the vice chairperson of the advisory group. So once again, welcome. Before we go to our serious business, just a minute, look at the person next to you, nicely with a smile. Remind the person, we are not patients. Pass on the message. We are not victims. We are living with HIV. We are needed. Critical players. And we serve our communities. And lastly, who do we call ourselves? We are community experts. Yes. Let us clap for ourselves. I'm also we are indeed community experts. Member in my country, Malawi. So our program is, and I am the national coordinator of ICW chapter in Malawi. Let's tap the grace. And Fridays are good days, and last days are good days. Advisory group. So I'm so sure we also have the same spirit. So in solidarity, we continue. So I've served as the vice chairperson. This is the right time for us. Of the advisory group. So once again, welcome. Before we go to our serious business, just a minute, look at the person next to you, nicely with a smile. Remind the person, we are not patients. Pass on the message. We are not victims. We are living with HIV. We are needed. Okay. Is that okay now? Yeah, it's finished now. I can go ahead? Yes. Okay. Technology at its best. Okay, so this is the right time. We have talked a lot on the problem, what's next, and now we have to make sure that we include all other stakeholders so that we're sure that we are moving together. Because we can be here talking, discussing, deliberating, but if we are leaving someone behind, then our progress will also have some limits and it may be delayed. So I'm sure now all of us, we know where we are coming from, and we are aware also of where we're going. So let's face it, keep going. So Florence already started mentioning on what is on our program today. We'll have UNA's leadership on the sustainability of the HIV response in the changing financial landscape. And also we look on opportunities for people living with HIV, engagement and collaborations. And we have James Atenzi, who is the Director of Equitable Financing Practice at UNAIDS. We'll have 10 minutes to make a presentation. And after that, we will proceed to HIV Market Impact Memo, as Florence has indicated, by CHAI and UNITAID. And this one, James Conroy will also take us through in 10 minutes presentation. Then we will allow question and answers before we continue to panel discussion. Before we continue to the panel discussion. So we are good. I don't know the people who are making the technical logistics. Are we ready for James Atenzi? Are we ready? You let me know when we're ready. So as we go along, I think now the anxiety is phasing out. We are facing reality. We are set, looking forward. While we're waiting for the technology, maybe one or two things, highlights for yesterday. If anyone remembers anything in brief, that would be good for us. Anyone? Yesterday's highlights? While we're waiting for our colleagues to connect us to the first presenter. Any highlights? We're not here, or just highlights of yesterday. What did you get yesterday? Yes, you can start. Just a brief highlights for yesterday.
No, so one thing which is stuck to my mind is that even people, those who are on ART, and we have 60% mortality. So what is that reason like? And as a person living with HIV and as an organization who's having the aim of improving quality of life, I think at least those gaps, if we can highlight, we can save some people. That is one message which I took.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Any insights? Yes, for yesterday, the highlights that we managed to get.
Good morning. I think for me, it's how the religious community is responding to HIV in fighting stigma and discrimination within the church. Because we all understand that in most churches, there are a lot of myths, and people, they do believe in their reverends or pastors. So I was very happy to hear that we still have church leaders that are progressive, that are able to convince the community within the religious on how they must do the right things.
Thank you very much. That was a good pick. Anyone else? Thank you.
I think I loved the presentation by Margaret Mbugua. I was fascinated by how you can integrate issues of children, young people, and young women together. That was something that stuck in my mind. And I'm looking forward to more partnership with her and her team to see how that model can be adopted in Uganda.
Thank you. Any other reflection? Yes. Let me pass the mic.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Flavia Chomkama from Uganda. I I was particularly interested in the community system strengthening, and Dr. Buku, when she reminded us that our structures have been taken for granted and we need to come up now and ensure that we are formally recognized and part and parcel of the integration that is going on across the different countries in light of the funding freeze, but also that we must deliberately be part and parcel of the government budgeting and planning and programming processes. Thank you.
Thank you. This is enough for the day, and I know there are a lot of reflections and highlights. Oh, that one is you can't. Okay, all right, go ahead.
Good morning, colleagues. I think the most thing that we saw yesterday that is much important for the communities is about social contracting opportunities, for which I believe, and I requested the presenters of yesterday to help us and develop a concept note that we can build on to really engage with our governments and our private sector federations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and many more that we have. So my own was, we have talked a lot about the crisis. It's now reality, we are moving on. So let's take it from there. And I'm told now our first presenter is James Atienzi, Director of Equitable Financing Practice from UNAIDS, is online. James, are you there?
Good morning, yes.
Good morning.
I've been here for a long time. I'm happy to be with you.
Yeah, we're also happy to have you. Okay, so you are our first presenter this morning. So take us through your presentation so we can start. You're good to go?
Perfect, I'm good to go.
Sure.
Good morning, colleagues. It's fantastic to be with you. I regret I'm not with you in person, but you have the better version of the UNAIDS team on equitable financing and sustainability. You have my colleagues Charles Birungi and Melissa Sobers in the room, and they have been working. We have been working together, so I'm presenting more the reflections, the collective reflections of UNAIDS and the work of this team to you today. Let me start by echoing some words that I've heard from Florence several times and I was hearing earlier today, and it is, yes, the shock, or a big shock has come. We now have to see how to go through it and to navigate it in the best way and to protect the things that need to be protected, to make the best for people living with HIV in this new environment, and to find the best possible ways to protect communities and to highlight the role and the relevance of communities. This is our starting point. Let me share my screen now to go to my presentation. I think you can see my presentation now, not yet in full screen, there it is. So I'm going to talk two parts to this presentation. First, are you hearing me okay? Because I can hear this echo that was happening a while ago with Charity.
Yeah, yes, we can hear you. You're loud and clear.
Okay, no problem. Okay, perfect. Yes, let me just show to you a reminder. We initiated HIV response sustainability roadmaps approach that was launched last year, and it was a new approach to sustainability where the front and center was country leadership and ownership. We were putting forward a methodology, and we were trying to bring together and align all the large international actors, communities and governments in one table to discuss what was the best possible future weather response to be effective and sustainable, to think about the end state, and with some assumptions. Some of the assumptions were the abundant international money would not continue to be there for long. There would be a decline. So it was important to plan for a different future, for a more country-owned future, and also for a less reliant on international resources future. So this was a little bit of the approach. We were focusing on trying to have today the conversations that would shape the conversation in the next years on HIV. Ensure the highest return on investment and effectiveness, include integration and health system strengthening, and make sure it would serve to put country priorities in the center so that donors and international actors would follow. Maybe I think I don't want to extend more. You are familiar with all this. Let me just share with you that we saw that, as you see, 19 countries had either finalized their roadmap part A that contains the high-level vision and had identified the key transformations that the response needed to be sustainable in the long term, and we had 15 other countries that were quite advanced. This was the status of the situation, and these were some of the main conclusions. As you see, I will not go through all of it, but community participation and social contracting was present in 2/3 of the Sustainability Roadmap Part A document, so that was seen as an important part of the work going forward. We moved then to prepare the Part B of the roadmap, designing those transformation plans. But then the economic shock of end January kicked in, and the priorities of countries transformed, of course, and then also, and this is important, the support, the economic and financial support UNH was channeling to countries that was coming from PEPFAR was halted, so we could no longer provide that level of support. So some of these processes were halted out of slower or lack of resources, but also of the emergency situation. It's then that we decided to prepare an emergency tool to help countries assess the gaps and plan for the emergency phase, and then move into the Part B. The Part B of the roadmap, that you'll see the guidance very soon, has these moves from the high-level outcomes identified in the first part to concrete plans for the next 1, 2, 3 years. And while, of course, in this moment of shock, it's difficult to prepare to look long-term, it is essential that we have now focus on the next months, but start to prepare for the next years, because we are going to need a sustainable future. And as we are talking about money today, the first moment of advocacy, I would say, to put on the table has to do with the budget cycle in countries. What needs to be in the budget of next year that was not there on previous years? That's an important question. So the orange box there, that's what we have been doing now, trying to have a detailed HIV funding landscape analysis, bring the best data, the data that were public until some weeks ago on PEPFAR, Global Fund, and domestic, so that countries had the best and most granular vision of what was there, and also create a tool that allows to move some pieces in that puzzle to find the best way of prioritizing. Community participation, I will not go through how communities have been participating in this sustainability roadmap. There are different levels from the design phase to different webinars, the advisory committee, and the technical working groups, multi-stakeholder dialogues. But I think what's important is that there have been challenges to the participation, and that we need to do the best to make sure that in this moment of shock, communities can be engaged at the best possible level. some challenges. The process moved very fast in many countries. Communities were not sufficiently engaged or influential. Multiple processes were happening simultaneously, so not sufficient attention was placed on these quite decisive roadmaps being designed. And there were also difficulties inside communities for national coordination and on the capacity on the entire process and representativeness. In the technical stages, such as an assessment exercises, there was also there could have been more engagement, and I think as this is a country tailored and country-led process, the attention to more generic vision and positions for community groups was not present. Also, there were many places where we saw difficult relations between community groups and governments, but also among different parts of the communities.
Recording in progress.
And then the shock came, and I'm just showing you here some of the impacts of the shock. I don't want to extend myself on this. I'm sure you must be familiar. The US was the largest donor on international health cooperation with 30%, and was the largest donor for HIV with 73%. So while we find out what is going to remain of that beautiful and fantastic PEPFAR program that has done so much good in the last decades, this is what we are set to lose, or what we are prepared to see, or what suddenly was mostly gone at the beginning of this year. There was a waiver issued, but the implementation of the waiver has been very limited, and there have been contradictions between what the waiver said and what actually happened in the ground. And there have been large service provision disruptions, serious risk of stockouts, and thousands of health and community workers out of a job, many community institutions that were very solid and that were delivering fantastic support, and losing the ground and not being able to do that. PEPFAR founded between 80 and 95% of the response, sorry, in 4 countries, between 60 and 80% in 7 countries, and between 40 and 60% in 5 other countries. So you can see the heavy dependence on PEPFAR of having a well-funded HIV response. This is what has been shocked. And also, and very especially, in prevention and prevention for key populations, that's where we had the most acute investments. You have there some numbers also to understand what is happening there. But on top of this, and I want to be clear and mention, that was a shock, but under the big noise of the shock, we saw the reduction in the budgets of many other donors affecting the HIV response. I will not go into the details, but we can discuss. So in this new context, after January 2025, financing became front and center. Emergency financing was the #1 priority, with service and medicine disruptions being the most pressing, or the item governments paid most immediate attention. Deep impact on the lives of community organizations across the globe. Work inside governments to seek that financing and cover the most immediate gaps, and donor financing for communities and prevention trumped, so even more pressing situation. Relevance, coordinated action and messages turns even higher. I can say this in full trust, and with all my appreciation and care for the communities, groups and participations in the sustainability roadmaps, but maybe there was not sufficient integrated key messages, key alignment and key focus that communities could follow on what were key elements that could be generic or general across geographies that they could defend. I think this coordinated action and these coordinated messages are even more relevant now that we are in this very constrained situation. And the emergency part of the financing, the part B of the roadmap, we allow for an opportunity to position and participate. These discussions are happening in different shapes. They are not part of the formal sustainability roadmap work, but as UNH, we are putting communities as central to any dialogue that happens, as central to decision making, as central to the assessment of situations. And some ideas about how to adapt in this new context with a strongly coordinated and united voice. And I'm saying this to you as community colleagues and partners. I think this also about international organizations. This is a time, the time of shock is also a time of try to bring unity, try to find what's the common ground that needs to be protected and what needs to be happening in such a way. Leverage the position to secure the gains and minimize the losses. And communities are the closest to the ground, so you can elevate. We will echo in UNH, but we will do also work to make this be more resonance. Remaining the people's voice in articulating a case for investment in HIV. It's a tough investment environment, but the health and economic benefits, the global health security, scientific advancing, diplomatic and geopolitical positioning are all relevant for HIV. What matters the most are people, but there are other arguments, and the people living with HIV and the communities are the ones that are best positioned to make those arguments, and we have to work together to help elevate those voices. I have to say it was a beautiful piece that we could see in the Washington Post some days back. I'm sure you have seen it and you have reflected about it. And then attention and reactivity to a fast-moving and resource-constrained environment is going to be important. And leveraging public financing and strong public-community partnerships. We saw a lot of appetite in the roadmap's Part A for social contracting. And as we know, it's going to be a very tough financing environment. This is also a place where the advocacy on the one side, but also the services are relevant, as are social enterprises and private sector financing. And let me just finish and finish this part and move to the financing. I think getting involved at all levels in this next stage is clearly very relevant, with politics and leadership building and demonstrating strong partnership and strong coalitions between civil society and governments where that is possible, promoting the need for regulatory elements that support communities, advocating for people living with HIV to be included in health insurance and social assistance schemes, getting involved in the research and innovation field, getting involved in the research efforts that could lead to more innovative care models for HIV, exploring social enterprises for communities, leveraging capacity building opportunities and for upskilling community actors, even in a resource-constrained environment, and in the communities remaining the people's voice and supporting monitoring and evaluation to ensure that lessons are maintained. Let me look now at the money, what's on the other side. How are we going to get to a new HIV financing model? We are speaking to it this way because, as I heard yesterday, even with the return or with the expected return of resources from the US at what level and what priorities we don't yet know, although the waiver seems to be a good indication. And with the expected replenishment of the global fund, at what level again we don't know, so that funding is safe for this and next year. But after that, we'll see what the level is. We have to look at what can be there in the future response. From heavy dependence and poor macroeconomic conditions, so very limited resources and low domestic resources for HIV and inefficiencies, we need to move to leveraging international private sector and new mechanisms, so seeking where the money can be, such as pandemic fund, climate financing, and some instruments that have been explored with success by our global fund colleagues, such as debt swaps. Not that they are massive or bring a lot of money, but in a time of very limited resources, those can be important. And at a larger scale, debt relief should come to a number of countries, to a number of countries with high HIV prevalence and high debt repayments, countries that are spending 3, 5, 6 times more on debt repayments than on health. And when that problem is tackled, we need to stand ready to see that HIV and health are considered on where to redirect those resources. There are also policies that can be put in place to curb illicit financial flows, and this is quite complex, but there are ways in which countries can cut some tax incentives and some tax exemptions that are given to international companies to curb this, having a more effective tax administration, and also promoting, very important, earmarked taxes for health and HIV. So taxes where you collect the money that is going to be used immediately for that very purpose. We also have blended and innovative financing with the integration. Blended and innovative financing meaning combination of the now limited grant resources with other resources such as soft loans or loans with low interest rates, or de-risking instruments such as guarantees for certain operations. We need to explore these that have not been explored for the HIV world, and we need to make sure that HIV response is present in health insurance and social assistance schemes. Above everything else, we do need to secure that there is stronger domestic revenue mobilization, so that there are efforts to increase revenue collection, and there is effective advocacy in the country, and your voices can be very increased. The allocation for HIV and health combined, and all the other parts of the HIV. Finally, leveraging efficiency as a financing currency for this is very important. And establishing effective national procurement systems where those are not available, and ensuring pool procurement mechanisms among different countries is going to be very important. We have been able to reduce substantially the price of ARVs, but that was through the systems of large international donors, and we don't know for how long, or whether we want to be reliant on those systems going forward into the future. So it's important that pool procurement, owned and led by countries, comes into place, or by the regional institutions, such as the institutions of the African Union, that are playing a role. Finally, I would like to mention that when we speak about the private sector, there are parts of the health and HIV responses that play a role in mobilizing the private sector and crowding in their capacity, their investment, their innovation. And I think also the procurement system, also parts of the innovation pieces are quite prone for the private sector, or all the testing of new medicines and the clinical testing of new medicines in the African region, in the population that will then use the medicines. There are some industrial opportunities there to bring jobs, to bring economic activity around the health and the HIV system. Let me put it here in a more visual way, and to round it up: earmarking healthcare allocations, health taxations, ensuring measures to address tax evasion, so fight and curb tax avoidance, and have a more effective tax administration, ensure that the support of international financial institutions, there's also a part of that goes for health and for HIV financing. Introducing these pro-health taxes to generate revenue for healthcare, and very important, fostering alignment and coordination between key stakeholders. Sustainability roadmaps are a tool, and need to continue to be a tool to ensure that there is a national plan that is followed by donors, and not that there are donors' plans that are completed by national plans. That needs to be turned around, and I think the sustainability roadmap is an important tool to make this happen. And let me say that sustaining community-led responses to HIV as a means to deliver services, but a means to accompany and support communities, and as a means to advocate for many of the important pieces, and others in the system to advocate for the voice of these communities, is going to be really important. As you see, also integrating HIV service into national health financing through public models is going to be really important, and moving towards an integrated health service model is part of the move. In this new world, were talking, and I have to say, in non-sustainability roadmap, I'd say countries were talking as an integrated system as the end game. So there needs to be a reflection on how all the different services and approaches to the HIV system can be integrated, and how communities can also be part of that system, and so that community system is not parallel to the health system or to the national system, but there is a strong interfacing that includes financing for that purpose. Let me stop here, colleagues, and hand it back to you, Charity, and thanks for your patience and for the opportunity to share some reflections with you in these difficult times.
Thank you so much, James. You deserve a big round of applause. Let us give him a big round of applause. Thank you so much for the good and informative presentation. And we have noted a lot of things, and we have already started to be strongly coordinated. That's why we're here, to make sure that we have united voice. And we also continue to watch what matters. And we have already started seeing alternatives for funding the HIV response in your presentation. So we're looking forward, and we make sure that PLHIV networks, we get involved at all levels. So you still hang around, because we have the session of question and answers. But for now, we need to proceed to the next presentation on HIV market impact memo by CHI and Unitate from James Conroy. Then after that, we'll have question and answers. So James, you still hang around. Thank you. Are we ready with James?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. I'm just going to share my screen. If someone could enable my sharing, please.
Okay, they're doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So over to you.
Great. I'm still not able to share at the moment, but I will just hold on.
Okay, all right. We are looking to it. Are we winning? Okay. Yeah, good. They say, is it okay?
Great. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Over to you.
Great.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Apologies, I'm not there in person. My name is James Conroy. I'm a director on the HIV team at CHI, Clinton Health Access Initiative. It's a pleasure to be presenting to you. It's great to see some familiar friends and colleagues in the room. And to those who I haven't met, it's a pleasure to present to you this morning. I'm going to be sharing the key findings from Unitate's support for CHI's HIV market impact memo, which, as I say, was supported by Unitate as part of our collaboration on an HIV treatment and access. So the purpose of the HIV market impact memo was to highlight the significant risks facing the global HIV markets and broader implementations of HIV service delivery in low and middle income countries. The memo, the data that you see in the memo is largely based on CHI market intelligence, so stock status data from CHI data requests and work that we do with many ministries of health and supply chain units across 14 countries. Those 14 countries represent around 45% of the HIV burden across NMICs. The information is valid as of March 2025. I know we're already moving quickly into April, but we're going to continue updating this as the situation evolves, particularly on the supply side and procurement. The situation is evolving almost daily across countries, so we'll be sure to iterate this with new versions in the future. A couple of caveats quickly before I dive into the data. The data was shared under the condition of anonymity. So sadly, as we go through the data, you'll see that I'm not able to share specific country names under the data. You'll understand that we simply can't break that trust that we have built with the government. If we were to break that trust, we wouldn't have access to this data in the future. and we wouldn't be able to work quickly to support the countries, as well as work with USAID, Global Fund, and donors like UnitAid to try and address some of the impending risks that we see across the supply chain. So I apologise, I'm not able to give that level of specificity, but hopefully this will still be very helpful. I'd also add that the data we're going to show here is national level stock. And so this isn't a representation of, or shouldn't be interpreted as a representation of the stock situation at specific facilities, noting that with the US cuts and terminations of certain implementing partners, service delivery and supply chains within the country have been severely impacted, and that then has impacted the availability of stock at facilities. But the picture that we're presenting here is the stock at the national level. So I just wanted to give that additional context as well. We sadly don't have access at the moment to the facility level stock status, I think in part due to a number of the partners who had that data being US funded, but also a number of vital community-led monitoring initiatives that gave great access to kind of on-the-day stock availability of facilities have also been impacted and are no longer working. So a couple of just framing points there before I dive in. So I will start first with prevention products. We've seen severe disruptions both in the availability of some of the key prevention products, in this case oral PrEP, which I'm sure people are very familiar with, but also the impact on future prevention products like long-acting CAB-LA. And so as you see on the slide here, there are 4 countries at risk of stock out of oral PrEP in the next 6 months. And even where stock is may be available at the central warehouses, PrEP access at facilities has been limited due to deprioritization of some of those last mile distribution cycles that get the commodities to the facility, and this is true for all products. But also PrEP access at facilities has been impacted due to constrained let's say population focuses of many of the US funded implementers, closure of some of the key distribution sites and facilities for PrEP, and a reduced number of trained PrEP healthcare workers or providers who may have had projects terminated. And then, as I mentioned, introduction of new, highly effective injectable prevention products, CAB-LA, has also been really disrupted. PEPFAR was the largest procurer of CAB-LA, accounting for 95% of LMAC supply in 2024. That is shifting slightly as we move into 2025. But for example, the largest donation of 230,000 doses for South Africa was not completed, and other countries have CAB-LA stuck in warehouses still, or as I mentioned, part of the service delivery disruptions are impacting getting the product to patients. So I think these gaps and impacts will have significant impact. It's perhaps slightly less on the supply side here and more on the service delivery side. But it's really going to impact both access to oral PrEP, but also the momentum, as I say, around CAB-LA. And if not rapidly addressed, this will obviously lead to more new infections, particularly around some of the vulnerable populations, such as key populations and young people. So my next slide summarizes the picture for early infant diagnosis, EID, obviously a critical step in detecting HIV infection early in newborns and infants and born to pregnant women living with HIV, and then enabling us to put them to antiretroviral treatment as quickly as possible. There is a high immediate risk of stock out for EID commodities. As you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, some of those countries are already facing a stock out of at least one of the commodities that are critical for EID. Now, this doesn't mean that in those countries there is no stock availability of EID reagents, but it means that for certain testing platforms, and here we're looking at the GeneXpert, the Roche, or the Pima, they may have, or they have got stock outs of one of reagents for one of those platforms. Of course, ensuring access to EID services is critical and essential for reducing PEDS morbidity and mortality. We know that studies have shown that 50% of children die before the age of 2 if they're not identified and initiated on treatment. Countries have made fantastic progress in EID over the past 5-10 years, and we're at real risk here of stockouts undoing a lot of that fantastic work. So on the next slide, I'll talk about HIV testing services, or HTS. And so we have a moderate risk of stock out here for rapid diagnostic tests, as you can see. I should caveat here that we have far less countries who were able to share stock status here. It's only 4 countries versus some of the others which have far more countries. But there are 3 countries in East and Southern Africa who are at risk of stock out of A1, the kind of first HIV RDT in their national testing algorithm, and that's within the next 9 months. So previously in most cases it would be the next 6, but here it's a slightly longer timeline given the stock available in country. And so I think it's important to really flag here that whilst we're not seeing immediate risks from a stock situation, there really is large-scale impact across the delivery of testing services across these 4 countries and more broadly across the region. We've seen large-scale terminations of healthcare workers in high-burden countries who are solely focused on HTS, on HIV testing services. In one country, USAID contracts have terminated 53% of the HTS-focused healthcare workers. And that obviously leaves us with just enormous gaps in testing, even when we have the commodities available in country. And of course, reduced access to testing, delays treatment, and ultimately is going to impact health outcomes and could increase HIV transmission. So now I'll move on to AHD, advanced HIV disease. I'm sure everyone's familiar. This is the CD4 count below 200, or the presence of WHO stage 3 or 4 conditions such as TB. And CD4 testing is really the gateway to the advanced HIV disease package of care. CD4 testing over the past 15, 20 years has gone through a bit of a peak and then a lull, and we've been working really hard over the last couple of years to reprioritize CD4 testing, given its importance to advanced HIV disease. As you can see on the slide here, this is not a good picture. We have at least 10 countries facing stockouts in the next 6 months of at least one point-of-care CD4 test. I should add, of the 3, Visitec, Pimo, and FaxPresto that we've looked at here, particular concerns around Visitec and Pimo. I say that because some countries are phasing out now FaxPresto. This is the last year where reagents will have shelf life left of that device. That device is being phased out. And so particularly where we have countries with low amounts of stock for Visitec and Pimo, that is a concern. Of additional concern here is where we have orders paused for some of these products. Visitec only has an 18-month shelf life, and so every month of that shelf life, when we're talking about an LFA test that is decentralized facilities, is critical. And so to have orders paused here is of real concern as well. We're also seeing here, as with every other area, healthcare worker terminations impacting demand and access to these tests. And of course, for AHD products and commodities, the demand is relatively low, and so the certain disruptions in the market really impact what are single supplier products in many cases. Of course, without point-of-care CD4 testing, we miss AHD diagnoses, we miss the opportunity to link patients to prevention or treatment for opportunistic infections, and ultimately this will increase morbidity and mortality as well. I will just, one final caveat on this slide. Some countries don't prioritize point-of-care CD4 testing and use conventional lab-based CD4 tests. South Africa is a great example of a country that heavily relies and uses conventional lab CD4 testing, and so South Africa, for example, wouldn't be represented on this slide. So the next step in AHD, of course, is screening and diagnosing opportunistic infections such as TB and cryptococcal meningitis. On the left-hand side here, you can see the stock status for CRAG LFA, the screening test for cryptococcal antigenemia. And here we have at least 7 countries at risk of a stockout within the next 6 months. On the right-hand side, we have TB LAM, again, a screening tool for TB. And here we have 5 countries at risk of stockout in the next 6 months, but specifically 3 countries at real risk of stockout in the very immediate future. Of course, rapid access to these tests is just critical, both to link those who are negative to prevention again, and those who are positive to treatment for these opportunistic infections. And then the next slide talks about the access to OI treatment. So here we're thinking about TB preventative therapy, but then also treatment for cryptococcal meningitis. And what you can see here is really some quite big picture in terms of stock availability across countries. I think this speaks to the fact that as countries have introduced these programs, particularly on the cryptococcal meningitis side over the last couple of years, PEPFAR has been a really critical key supporter of those introductions and sustainable access to these products, which in turn means that when PEPFAR orders are paused or delayed, we have a really bleak stock situation. So as you can see, we have a number of countries facing stockouts of both cytosine and liposomal B in the immediate outcome. And to be blunt, that is life threatening. These drugs have a really significant impact on saving lives for people with cryptococcal meningitis. Without these, it's almost always ends in mortality, sadly. So a really dire situation here in a couple of countries. I will now switch over to ARVs. And so, as my colleague on the last presentation mentioned, we've had great progress in terms of optimizing ARV supply, reducing price, getting everyone onto DTG-based regimens over the past couple of years. And we have around 95% of adults now on DTG-based regimens across NMICs for those on treatment. Access to TLD and other ARVs, second-line ARVs, is probably a medium-term risk moving forward. We have 4 countries at risk of stock out in the next 6 months. Although those countries do have pipeline products, either global funds that we're exploring bringing forward, or with PEPFAR that we hope will restart in the immediate future. But I would caveat this again and say that, however, even though the national stock level looks okay, we've obviously seen in the immediate term ongoing stock uncertainty across countries, and that's led to rationing in some countries. And people receiving much shorter supplies or packs or days worth of ARVs than they would be used to. And of course that then leads to increased burden on already quite stretched facilities, additional clinic visits, additional cost and time implications for people living with HIV. And then that can also impact adherence, increased treatment failure, higher rates of AHD, and ultimately increases in morbidity and mortality as well. So whilst we do have, I'd say, a medium risk in terms of national supply of ARVs here, we have seen that there still is a number of challenges in terms of accessing ARVs in country caused by disruptions to both supply chains in country and also service delivery within country as well. And then to look at pediatric ARVs, again, great progress over the last couple of years. Transitioning to DTG-based regimens for pediatrics, both infants now and in young children and adolescents. Many countries are still completing that rollout to DTG, and a number of countries were in the early stages of introducing the new fixed-dose regimen of PALD. And to avoid expiries and waste of stock, many countries have been running down the previous 2-dosed formulation of AL plus DTG in anticipation of receiving PEDS ALD as the new fixed dose formulation from PEPFAR. And of course the challenge with that is if those orders were due to come in Q1 or Q2 of this year from PEPFAR, the countries were running down stock of those commodities in country in Q1 and Q2, and now those orders have been delayed. And so there are at least 8 countries who have reported risks related to that transition to the new formulation. We have 5 countries, as you see on the slide, facing stock out for DTG-based regimens in the next 6 months. And I think the wider number is because a number of countries were also using support from US-funded partners around trainings and guidelines to help manage that transition to the new formulation, and a lot of that support has now also been challenged by these terminations. I'd really underscore this population as one of particular urgency and importance. We know that the impacts that disruptions to treatment have on mortality for children. This is an area that we are urgently working on with both ministries of health that are impacted, with Global Fund to bring orders forward, with USAID colleagues who are now back online, and really making sure these are the orders that are prioritised with the highest urgency for the vulnerable population. And then my final slide is on viral load. Obviously, viral load monitoring is essential to ensure viral suppression, detecting failure, and ensuring that we reduce the risks for HIV transmission. We have 7 countries, as you see on the top right-hand side of that slide, who are at risk of stock out of viral load cartridges in the next 6 months. You can see we actually have 2 countries that are already stocked out on the graph, and that's of immediate concern and urgent action required. And then on the bottom half, you can see that there are 6 countries at risk of stock out of viral load assay or consumables that relate to viral load testing. And of course, if we can't identify treatment failure, we risk not being able to link patients to adherence counselling or to switch regimens. And so this has a really, really big impact both on those patients, but also on the HIV transmission. And so I'll conclude with this slide. I think current funding cuts threaten to undo years of progress, as we heard from both our colleagues earlier, and I'm sure from the discussions yesterday. And we really need to be led by empowered governments and communities as we think about this HIV rebuilding process across many countries. We're thinking about that in a couple of ways. Thinking about how we can better coordinate the market mechanisms here, ensuring we have country and global-led structures, and really thinking about the immediate short-term needs. I've talked about a lot of those in this presentation. How can we alleviate some of those with both Global Fund, ministries, PEPFAR orders that do come back online and are slowly coming back online, hopefully, as well as with donors such as UNITAID and others to identify and address immediate gaps. Thinking about how we rebuild country ownership in the supply chain in particular. A lot of the impact we've seen in the supply chain in country is because a lot of the supply chain was run and owned by partners, and that's not sustainable going forward. That has to be addressed to ensure that we have more sustainable but also resilient health systems in country from a supply chain perspective. And then, as Jamie mentioned on the previous presentation, thinking more about long-term government-led financial systems and also prioritising efficient use of resources across the country. So I'll wrap there. Thank you so much again for the time. I hope this was useful. I'm happy to take questions in the Q&A, and on the right-hand side there, I've just flagged that if you go to, if you'd like to see the memo, it has a lot more details. If you go to clintonhealthaccess.org, it's right on the front page of China's website. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. A big round of applause for James Conroy. Thank you,
James, for the presentation. Thank you, James, for the presentation. And thank you so much for putting us on the loop to HIV market impact. Sometimes we do read the documents, but understanding can also be a problem and a challenge. But with your elaboration here, yeah, we know where we are now. At least we're getting it loud and clear. So thank you so much for that. Just another round of applause for you and Jane, all of you together. Jane, I'm sure you are online. Hi, May. Hi. Are you online?
Hola, hola. Hello, I'm online.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so now we're moving on to questions and answers. The participants here, they will be asking questions, and we'll be taking 3 at a time for both of you. So let us now pass on to the flow so that we have a few questions. So we have 1, 2, and 3. Let's start with 1, 2, 3. Then you'll be the 4th one. Thank you. Another mic, please, so you can help me. 1 there. Then there's 2. Thank you, Sean. You can assist me. So let's take 3 questions for the start, and then we take another round of questions.
Thank you very much. My name is James Kamau from Kenya Treatment Access Movement. My name is James Kamau from Kenya Treatment Access Movement. One, the first presenter, you talked about the debt swaps and debt reliefs. It has not worked in the last 10 years in very many countries. And we have countries who, when they receive the debt relief, they don't put it back. So I think we need to look at a new approach, and I think you have the answers on that. On the issue of the child, do you foresee these shortages as going to lead to price increments by pharmaceutical companies? Because definitely, even with the funding going down, the pharmaceuticals need to make money. After all, they paid for the campaign for Trump. So do you foresee this as a way towards getting an increase in the prices?
Thank you. That was the first question. Next one is here. Yes, and then we have a third person.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, Jaime. Good morning, James. My name is Inad. I have a question for Jaime. In the presentation or in the sustainability roadmap, where does the 30-80-60 target and 10-10-10 target complement? Like, are these targets being complemented in the sustainability roadmap? Because if we're going to talk about sustainability and having the community to lead all the services, where is the 30-80-60 and 10-10-10 targets in the roadmap? That's my first question. Second question, are there any updates on NASA or the National Aid Spending Assessments? If we're going to talk about financing, should we be looking at first the findings of the NASA exercises and how much are actually going to the communities from these from the domestic financing? The third question is. The third question is on the optimization of the HIV budget. In the optimization of the HIV budget, in some of the country documents, it's not in your presentation, but in some of the country documents, the budget allocations goes to commodities, treatment and care delivery, services, including peer outreach. Where is the budget for community? I mean, community organizations for advocacy. We understand that some of these services may be delivered by community, but we have to also at least for us, the community, know how much actually is the budget that are being optimized for community-led service delivery. My question to James, thank you for the presentations. It's very enlightening, and it's good to have that knowledge from the stackouts. Do you work in Asia? What are the Asian countries are you working with, and how can we contact you? Second question to James, how can the community work with you? Because this is an important element of community-led monitoring, like monitoring of stackouts and supply, and I think we can define that.
Thank you. Yes, so then the last presenter, the third, the last person, was it you? Yeah, it's here, the front, this one. Questions.
So, it's a tough one to Jaime. On sustainability, like you mentioned, lots of things of engaging private sector, and that is an ongoing process, and we will do it. The current funding source is Global Fund. The Global Fund money is largely going to the government and big sharks. We are proposing since last 4 or 5 years, like allocate certain percentage directly to the community. That will resolve lots of sustainability problems. And UNAIDS has not done much on that agenda, so that is something. Is there in your mind or is there in your agenda? That is one thing. Second thing, and it's a very difficult question or introspecting ourselves. UNAIDS has lost trust since last, I think, 5-10 years. The program is already started derailing, not before the Trump decision. The program was already started derailing because community engagement was getting lesser. And UNAIDS role, which used to be there, standing firm with the community, advocating for the community, has reduced a lot. And that's what UNAIDS has lost trust from the community. Now from here onwards, what is your strategy to re-engage with community and also advocate for the community, especially with the Global Fund and other current funding which is available for HIV?
Thank you. So let us take the first round of questions. And Jaime, you have about 3 questions, so you'll be the first one to respond. And then James, you will respond also to your questions. Over to you, Jaime, for your response. I hope you got the questions.
Yes. Thank you, colleagues, and thanks for those really sharp and good and difficult questions, because that's the environment we're in, a moment of truth. And let me start with question number 1. When we look at our colleague from Kenya, he was saying debt relief and debt swaps have not worked. We need to do other things. Well, it's not entirely true that it has not worked. We haven't seen debt relief, but for 3 countries in the last 20 years. So yes, there was not translation of debt relief into HIV. The fact that HIV was has been so intensive in receiving granted donor money has not made it a destiny of other financing tools. But I think this is changing now quite dramatically. So as we see, you know, we had a very large initiative on debt relief in the African continent. I'm sure you all know. It came to fruition in 2008. That was the year where most of the relief happened, and that brought money for the health sectors, for the education sectors, and for investment sectors. We are now in a moment, disgracefully, where a number of African countries are facing a similar heavy indebtedness situation that will lead at some point for countries having debt relief, for increased fiscal space. My point is that when that happens, we need to be advocates for that to be completed, and this is more for lower income countries. When that happens, there will be availability of resources for different public investments. It's important to have HIV and health positions there. Also for countries with access to markets, I'm sorry to get a bit technical, such as Kenya, what's relevant today is that countries are paying an interest rate of 8, 9, 10% on the debt they have taken. That interest rates are impossible to devolve without losses for countries. So there's a big African level discussion and global level discussion on how to reduce the cost of debt, and how to create fiscal space in the immediate 5 years by reducing those interest rates and allowing countries to spend that money. And that money has gone up to almost 50% of the GDP in some countries. So it's a very, very important amount of money. And as you know, in your country, in Kenya, debt repayments are about 50% of the public budget. So any action on that is going to create fiscal space. I'm not saying that's an easy pathway, but in one way or another way, it will come forward, and it's important that health and HIV are there. Finally, on debt swaps, on your comment, debt swaps are an option that brings smaller amount of money, relatively small amounts of money, 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, so does not cover for the response, but it's actual resources that can flow to countries, and it requires a strong diplomatic effort because it's a bilateral negotiation. But we've seen the Global Fund being successful in speaking with countries and managing for them to let go the payment of a country and use that money for health investments. We've seen that through the Global Fund. We've seen that happen in recent years, and there may be more there. It's not a big source of funding, but there can be some resources. I don't have the table with me of the Global Fund, but I can share those resources with you to get that information. But that said, it's right to say, as you say, this is not enough. This is not what will take us out. So no, debt is the main problem to have fiscal space in countries today. But the other side of the coin is having sufficient tax collection, sufficient revenue collection, and effective tax administration. You need to look at those two items, how to increase revenue collection and eliminating tax exemption, looking to eliminate illicit financial flows are pathways for that, and having more progressive taxations. And we are speaking, and the world is speaking about wealth taxation that is not happening worldwide. And that's another avenue to increase the resources that go into the common coffers and then fight for the allocation for health and HIV. And finally, this is a more at-reach option, I would say, health taxes focused on collecting money from tobacco, alcohol, sugary beverages, and focalizing that in the health interventions. That's something that is being done in several countries and can be done in a quite rapid way and without creating a big disruption. And I say this because, of course, eliminating tax incentives for corporations, while very important, very adequate, very urgent, has a lot of political complication and a very complicated political economy. That's my first point. On community targets, so the roadmap does not set the targets. The targets are set in the plans of countries and have been internationally set and are tracked at a national level. The roadmap, what has done is identify 5 key domains And one of those 5 key domains is the enabling environment. The other has to do with the human rights and communities work. And there is an assessment tool where countries in the part A of the roadmap undergo an assessment. How are we doing in that front? And we use the data we have in the system. The truth is that the data on the enabling environment indicators are less robust than the data on the epidemiological indicators or the financing. They are not as strong, and there needs to be an effort in collecting those data at country level and in collecting those data from the side of UNAIDS establishing sharpened moving forward. What the roadmap provides is a vehicle to have the discussion on what is missing and the relevance of having communities around the table and actively playing a role. And asking these questions you are asking me today about what needs to be in the roadmap, what needs to be discussed, need to be asked in the country level discussions or in the regional level discussions, because that's what will lead to increased action. I think it's been quite successful to see human rights and communities' role and social contracting reflected in the sustainability roadmaps part A of at least, I think it was 2/3 of the countries that delivered them, but with more effective advocacy, participation and presence, the interests of communities and all the societal enablers will be better served, and we are ready to work together to support you on that front. And the last question had to do with the role of UNAIDS itself and how UNAIDS has lost resources over recent years. And yeah, that's a reality. UNAIDS is less funded today than was 5 years back or 10 years back, and has lost capacity, has smaller teams, has less presence and less money to do the work, and even less also because say that you are affected by the US cuts, UNAIDS is affected by the US cuts and is now undergoing reflection on what is the restructure needed to adapt the structure and the size of UNAIDS. Let me tell you that out of 3 different priorities that are being discussed, it is quite clear that supporting communities and connecting with communities through this very dark period that we may be in front of. We thought we were in front of a difficult and dark period for communities 1 year ago. Now we have, with this financing shock and with all the considerations for human rights and key populations, this is a really tough, or the toughest moments. UNAIDS is prioritizing in looking at this restructuring, is prioritizing prevention, is prioritizing sustainability, and is prioritizing communities. I think it's important to say this. I'm not leading our communities engagement. I'm here to support and to engage with you on the financing and sustainability field, but let me say that the team is working and ready to be more connected or connected as ever on the different aspects, and also keen to discuss what are the advocacy points that can be brought forward now in this complete environment with different actors, and it's a tough environment overall, and the reality is that countries are looking first at treatment and medicines and services and not that much at communities. So the effort we need to make, and we are ready to make, I think I hear that call, is to elevate how this is viewed, how the presence, the influence and the footprint of communities is kept and is protected. And we are entirely committed to that with the capacities we have and with the resources we receive. And that's very important because for us, the communities are the entities that have made the difference in bringing the response to the place where it is, and that's where UNAIDS will remain standing. Let me stop here and hand it back to you, Charity.
Thank you very much, Jaime. And James, in brief, because we have time constraints. We are still discussing on the same. We also have some stakeholders around here, donors here, so we need to transmit to our panel discussion. So in brief, respond to your questions so that we can move on. Then we'll be able to take all the questions together because it's not the same topic. Over to you, James.
Sure, I can keep this very brief. Thanks so much for the questions. The first question was relating to the funding or the pricing agreements and demand for the market. So I certainly hope that the work that has gone into building sustainable, low-priced access to kind of high-volume products and low-volume products across the Asia and the United States stays the same. Initial engagement with suppliers that have been impacted here doesn't suggest any shifts in the prices at the moment. That obviously will continue to be a discussion, we'll continue to assess that as settled. I certainly think that PEPFAR orders now slowly restarting at least mitigate some of that risk in the short term. I think in the long term, as we move to domestic or more domestic funding or different sources of funding for commodities, we need to think about how we support ministries and countries and supply chain units in particular through that transition to ensure they're able to leverage some of those existing pricing agreements and procurement mechanisms that the PEPFAR and Global Fund have built specifically over the last 10 to 15 years. That's going to be critical. If they're not able to leverage those, how do we build new mechanisms that allow them to benefit from the high demand, lower prices, kind of core procurement mechanisms that we've seen from Global Fund leverage in the future. So a lot of our work to think about medium to long term is going to be focused on ensuring that happens. The second question, the first question was around our work in Asia. Yes, Chai has a number of country offices working with industries in Asia. Actually, in the data I showed, there was representation of 3 countries in Asia in that data. So yeah, there is a good coverage there, and happy to discuss further some of that work. Happy for France and others to share my email address with the colleague who asked that question. And then the last question was on how community can work with Chai. So we work with community organisations across almost every project that we have at Chai. I can speak mostly to the projects that I lead. I have one large project on advanced HIV disease, where we work as part of a consortium with Africa. I saw Kenley in the room briefly on the camera. And he'll be able to speak more to how Africa is working as part of that project, PLHIV. But for stock availability specifically, so Africa works very closely with our Chai country teams, and that really enables an important two-way conversation where Chai is able to share the latest market intelligence and details around availability with the Africa country team, and Africa is also able to share back critical stock information and access challenges that they're seeing within the communities that we don't have access to, or the ministry doesn't have access to anymore with the determinations in the CLM. And then secondly, I think important to note, just Africa has done fantastic work in being able to get a seat at the table for a number of key forums, such as technical working groups in country, and that really is an important step to, one, ensure that the community is represented in those meetings at the ministry, and that hasn't always been the case, and really pleased that it is in many cases now, but also that there is an additional layer of visibility for those representatives at those meetings. And that's true for stock availability, as we're talking about more today, but more broadly for visibility into decisions that are going into HIV programming across countries. Thanks.
Thank you very much, James. So for the interest of time, I know we have more questions. Let us jot them down and I will collect them, and then I'll make sure that we get connected again to Jaime and James so that we respond, because we are on the same topics today, and we are privileged today that we have our stakeholders, donors, so that we go through again through a panel discussion. So without wasting much time, we need to continue with our deliberations, and I will now call upon our panelists for this morning, starting with UNAIDS. We have Charles and Melissa from UNAIDS. Let us give them a round of applause as they come in front. Are you okay? Maybe let us just stand up a little bit. Are you okay? Please, let us give them a round of applause. Starting calling Charles and Melissa from UNAIDS. Yes, so we have Charles. Charles is here representing UNAIDS. Thank you, Charles. You may take a seat. Now, let me call upon Bwiseka from Global Fund. I think I've mentioned your name correctly. Vui, let's call upon Vui as she walks majestically to the front. Let us give a round of applause. Thank you. Nice to see you in front of us. We are ready for a discussion. Let me call upon Sean from Ville. Sean, your round of applause again as comes in front. I'm now calling Sam from 8th Fold. Sam, are you here? Yes, please. Walk in front. And now Marie from Gates Foundation. Hello. Miriam. I could have written Maureen here on the program. Sorry, Miriam. Come in front. And lastly, Kenny Sikwese from Africa Banchai. Can we have one more chair? One more chair. One more chair, please. You take yours. So welcome our panelists, and I'll briefly just give you a minute just to introduce yourself, and then we're proceeding with our questions that we have for you for today for the PLHIV networks, people who are represented here. So just a brief of your introduction, move around, and then I proceed with the questions for our panel discussion. Over to you, Charles.
Thank you very much, my sister. I'm Charles Birumbi. I lead the macro and macroeconomic and fiscal policy work at UNAIDS.
I'm Wiseka Dubula. I head a department at the Global Fund called Community Rights and Gender. I'm South African.
I'm Sean Mellows. I work for VIV Healthcare in the Government Affairs and Global Public Health Department. I'm also from South Africa, but I now live in the UK.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mazikure Samuel. I'm originally from Zimbabwe. I work for AIDS Funds as the team lead for key populations in the international department, now based in the Netherlands.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Miriam Chukima. I am the Deputy Director for Disease Control at the Gates Foundation, and this is at the Africa Regional Office, which is based here in Nairobi. In case you don't know, we have a large team here now. We're growing every day. So I cover several key areas, but my focus is malaria, TB, HIV, and surveillance. I'm originally from Zambia, and I'm actually quite new at the Gates Foundation. 7 months, but I spent 17 years in the UN system. So my dear colleagues, Melissa, they're all here. Yes, thank you.
My name is Kenley Sikwese, and believe me, it was not by design. South Africa was sitting next to each other, and Zambians are sitting next to each other. But it's just coincidence. My name is Kenley Sikwese. I lead an organization, a regional organization called Africa Treatment Access Partnership. We work in about 22 countries. We have 5 active grants, as you heard some of it in the last presentation, and have some teams here in Kenya, one of whom is here, and very, very pleased to be part of this meeting.
Thank you very much. So those are the panelists that we have this morning. So we proceed to business. I'll start with you, Charles. You can pass on the mic. We know that there are sustainability plans going on. So funding shifts, they're also there. That's what we're hearing now. How are donors responding to the shifts in funding?
Thanks very much. Just a few quick reflections. One, it's true that as Jaime, so I work in the same team as Jaime, he's my team leader. As Jaime showed, last year we had nearly 34 countries globally engaging in developing sustainability roadmaps, and currently, as he mentioned, countries are beginning to think and work on sustainability roadmaps, part B, which are really transformation plans, countries saying, okay, when it comes to said financing, these are the transformations we want to engage in. When it comes to the systems, this is what we want to do. And countries are being very, very, very specific with what because we analyzed about 11 of the roadmaps that we received, we saw as at the end of last year, and we saw very bold transformations. So that's one part that I just wanted to highlight. In terms of how the shifts that are happening, I think we're hearing a couple of things. One is for sure, and Nduku mentioned that yesterday, that the past is past. It appears that development assistance is really going to shrink. I mean, we've kept hearing the UK, for example, being very candid with what percent of the gross national income will now go to official development assistance. And so in that shift, there are a couple of things we are still hearing, that even the little development assistance that will remain, we will likely not see so much going to single issues. And that speaks to all the vertical programming that has been happening over the last 3 decades or so. It's a hard messaging that we are hearing. But the other things that we keep hearing, and we're being, it's a safe space, so we're being very candid with each other, that efficiency, and my colleague Melissa keeps saying, each time we hear it, that it's the new currency. But really, efficiency is going to be critical. And by efficiency, basically, we keep thinking, and we can be honest with each other, that for a very long time, many of us who have spent decades in the HIV response, we've possibly felt like we're driving a Lamborghini when a Toyota Premio could do the job. So some of the reflections we had, for example, yesterday around integration, seem to resonate with possibly we can't continue running a full clinic and dedicated staff. We possibly need to get going in that direction. But there is untapped potential that we've not, and I just want to flag two. One is, and there are discussions at even more continental, many of you might have seen, for example, the concept note that the Africa CDC released last week around what the new financing model could look like. And things like health taxes, basically very small excise duties on alcohol, on tobacco, and sugar-sweetened beverages. We see, and I know Vu or Sean might talk about South Africa's experience with excise duty, with the health taxes. They seem to be very effective fiscal policies that are not being used optimally in a couple of countries, yet they hold so much potential. Potential to not only raise a bit of revenues, but also improve health. And for HIV, I'm speaking to the converted, we seem to see ability to really have a dent on the epidemic by just reducing consumption, or actually stop cessation or people never starting. So we are hearing a couple of things. They're telling us, look, the private sector, because governments are rich, private wealth has been growing exponentially post-COVID. And they're saying, let's engage with the private sector. So, and I don't want to send a message that there is sort of like capitulation. It's really the new era that we are going to operate in. So I just want to stop with those few reflections, but happy to speak to a couple of other reflections. Oh, just before I leave, and one is, there is this, even the donors that are going to remain, the money won't be the way we knew it. It will. We've known the Global Fund co-financing policy. Co-financing is going to become an increasingly important tool as a way of crowding in and leveraging domestic resources. And certainly for global health initiatives, from whether it's the Global Fund, whether it's PEPFAR, we're likely going, and many will remember the Lusaka agenda, we're likely going to begin hearing very concrete timelines for when do we get out, do we transition? Because many initiatives started and there was never a sunset. We never said when that will end. With those few reflections of what we're hearing globally and regionally, I want to stop here and hope that gives you a feel of how the context, the landscape is changing, and possibly how we need to think about engaging in this very changed landscape. Thanks.
Thank you, Charles, for kickstarting the discussion. So over to you now. Tell us how Global Fund is responding to the funding crisis. You know, there are shifts in funding, the sustainability plans, and also involvement in the shifts. So over to you, hear from you.
All eyes on me. If I may omit the first part, because, and you will understand the context we are in, I am not able to tell you in very clear terms what are we doing now to respond to the crisis. If I may omit that part. And I am doing it in a way that I hope is responsible, because the Global Fund is still also affected by the 90-day freeze. We are still under an evaluation. Whatever we say will be used against all of us. With that said, we know for sure that things are not going to be the same. But last year, when the elections were very clear, the direction that the elections were going, that it was most likely that we're going to see a big shift from the US. From the perspective of the Global Fund, we thought, let's engage with countries first to understand what are we going to do? What levers can we pull within the Global Fund that we can use to safeguard certain things that we know for sure might be funded or not be funded? So I'm going to focus then on the things that I think we can still make a way to still make a difference, but not in the same way. And I agree with Charles that the countries now have become the center of conversation. Because countries have become a center of conversation, because we all know that countries have a responsibility and a duty to their citizens and their citizens' health. Unfortunately, countries did not get enough time, any warnings that we are living now. Because now, living countries without any opportunity to plan for an exit, we have left a crisis. And collectively, I'm saying we, because we could have foreseen this. I don't want to talk politics. We could have foreseen this. But that's not the Global Fund position that I'm saying we could have foreseen this. Let me come to the Global Fund. As you know, the Global Fund supports HIV, TB, and malaria. We know that people don't live single lives, even including us in this room who are living with HIV. We are concerned about TB being one of the biggest killers of people living with HIV. We are concerned that in the 3 months of no PEPFAR or PMI funding, in countries where they have high malaria burdens, people are dying. In the rain season, people cannot wait for the Global Fund to make a decision in May or make a decision in November or for what will happen to the PEPFAR. People with malaria are going to die. Maybe some of us with HIV, we might take another 5 years before our viral load are not suppressed and we will die 5 years later. With malaria, you do not have a chance. So I just want to bring that reality, that yes, we may be talking about HIV, but let's not forget our brothers and sisters, or even us, who will be affected by multiple diseases. What are we going to do? But I think this moment for the Global Fund, it's asking the Global Fund to be really flexible and be agile. What becomes the needs of countries now are not going to be what we planned for at the beginning of Grand Cycle 7. So countries will have to help us in how do we shift and become flexible to accommodate their current needs. And all of that will be sometimes in conflict with what communities are asking. I'm just putting that as a disclaimer. As you know, most of the Global Fund grants are highly commoditized. That is the reality, and I think my comrade mentioned already that directly funding communities has been an outcry from communities for many, many years. And even that investment has not increased at the same level at which we're increasing grants for commodities. The need for commodities now is even worse, with all the gaps left by all the partners that have left. So you tell me, what will be funded in a flexible way and an agile global fund when it comes back and negotiate with countries? What will be that looking like versus what are the priorities of communities? And what are we going to do and engage in the CCMs when we have such a big gap? But for the sector, I want to say here is an opportunity for us to plug ourselves into the national health planning and health budgeting in countries. Because that's where the decisions are going to be made, what will be a priority. I am sure the ministers of health already are engaging with the ministers of health, and they'll probably engaging with the Global Fund. They will have a list of priorities. Do we know what are those priorities? Have we been engaged in those priorities? Because sometimes ministers of finance don't even know what the Global Fund contribution is, or even are not tracking it. So we do need to get there to prioritize the things that will not be coming back. Here I want to highlight all community funding and prevention is not coming back from PEPFAR. It's very clear from the current waivers. That's where the biggest gap is going to be. Our PrEP programs, even to be ambitious and think about Lenacapavir, even to be ambitious to think about Kebele, even to scale up oral PrEP, to scale up Dapivirine ring. Governments need to prioritize that too. Without prevention, we will never get out of this hole. Prevention is our way out. There is enough of us who are living with HIV. We cannot afford this crisis to put us where we were 30 years ago. So if we drop prevention in our priority list, we drop communities in our priority list, we are going backwards. That's the things that I think are not going to be prioritized. They will prioritize the things that they can negotiate with the Global Fund, negotiate with PEPFAR. The rest is going to be seen as nice to have. And get to the national conversations. Let's track the budgets. After if we don't know what our budgets, our health budgets are, and how we can track our budgets in countries. I know some countries, some comrades from Asia are advanced with this because they transitioned from the Global Fund a long time ago. Let's learn from our comrades from Asia, especially for us in Africa. How did they transition? When you transitioned, how did you get to the governance system? We heard yesterday from a comrade from Indonesia that they now have a private government partnership with communities where you can be funded directly. Did they get there? What were the steps that got them there? What type of capacity did they need to get them? Because Africa is behind. We are not even social contracting at the scale to be social contracting. Solely for service delivery. They are not going to social contractors for advocacy. They are not going to give us money to go and shout at them and do social accountability and do CLM. So we have to think now, what should the Global Fund do in the case where government does not do social contract for the things that we think? Prioritize your investments in these areas because government is not taking this piece and not taking that piece, and be creative and not ask everything in the list. And lastly, I am worried about commodities and access to quality products in Africa. That is one of the things that needs us. We fought for those commodities. We fought for the drugs that made us alive. If there are no donors and that goes to governments, and I'm not saying I don't trust our governments, I trust them with my eye on it. I trust them with us monitoring them. I trust them knowing that we are going to question them. But if we are going to step back in these key things that are going to be discussed, as Ndugu mentioned yesterday, I am worried decisions are going to be made on our behalf, including what type of commodities we are going to prepare to have and the ones that we're not going to have. Otherwise, we might as well fold our arms and say we are only going to have DTG And that will be the last medicine we will ever see. Because we are not looking forward. In this line, that's better than dolutegravir. What will be the next first line for children? What will be the next first line for people who have complex challenges with medicine? We still need our eye on that and not just barely survive to maintain what we have now. We still have to aspire to live to 100 years with HIV, alive and healthy. So those are the things that I think we must ask ourselves, what then becomes the role of the Global Fund in that agenda? How should the Global Fund evolve itself to support that agenda? And how should the Global Fund support and fund communities differently? The last thing on the communities being funded, we've heard many times advocates from communities to fund communities directly. And the Global Fund has done very small, example, Her Voice Fund, Gender Equality Fund with the partnership with the private sector. We've demonstrated that we can fund communities directly. Now, Grant Cycle 8, we must do this with a big bang. But the bang must come from the noise. The bang can't come from me, from inside. I'm co-opted, my mouth is zipped. I'm very loud here, but inside, kunzima. So I need you. Write op-eds, position communities now. As the board is going to meet in May, make as much noise on the Global Fund to be its role in this shifting funding context. What do you want that to look like? How? What mechanism for in funding communities direct? Is what we are doing now the right thing? Is multi-country the right thing? We know that multi-country has not benefited all regions. MENA region is chronically underfunded. Is that the approach we want, or maybe there's a proposal you want to put on the table? We are going to go to catalytic investment design. What is going to be the proposal, and what should be the mechanism to fund communities directly? And those solutions are known in this room. Bring those solutions to the Global Fund and let it be known that communities are ready to work in a very different way. So maybe with, and I'm sorry now I didn't even make it like Charles, I didn't do introductions and do small things. I went straight to the meat. Yes, you've been behaving, I didn't behave.
Okay. So over to you, Sean.
It's a very good segue from Vu, where she said, I need you. And I think the HIV response needs you. And so in situations like these, I do think it requires difficult discussions and difficult decisions. And there are a few areas where I think these difficult discussions and decisions have to take place, because I think it all relates to sustainability. I, of course, speak here wearing different hats. I'm obviously here as VIV, as a donor, but I also sit here as a person living with HIV who was there at the beginning when GNP was created. And I've said some of these things before, and whilst I understand they are difficult and complex and sometimes uneasy, I think that we need to say them again, and we need to figure out how we move forward. Because, colleagues, we all really want the Global Fund to succeed in its replenishment. But if it does not, there's going to be another earthquake. And it's going to impact countries, and it's going to impact programs, and we're going to say, yo, we weren't ready. Be warned. If the Global Fund does not have a successful replenishment, we are going to have another earthquake. But our starting point has to be remembering our past. We didn't just arrive here magically. People fought, people educated, advocated, mobilized, signed petitions, protested, toyed, provided services, provided counseling. We capacitated ourselves in public speaking, registering organizations, developing work budgets and M&E frameworks. We served on committees, technical working groups, and boards. We now have decision-making authority on governance boards at the highest levels. We fought to have a voice and to have a vote, and those votes have impact. But we also represented, we held to account, and we were accountable. And that is huge, and it's taken a lot of investment and a lot of time. And so we need to figure out how we monetize that. How do we use our history, our collective capacity, our collective expertise, and sell that to governments and to private sector? Social contracting is an option, and it's been spoken about a lot here. But social contracting is only effective, as Vu said, in some instances. And we need to figure out about all those other areas where social contracting isn't going to work. And I identified 3 areas where I want us as people living with HIV to reflect on. The first one is around representation. We need to ensure that our representatives are informed and accountable. We should not have people serving in seats for a lifetime. And definitely not longer for 2 to 3 terms. Yes. But importantly, these representatives have to connect to their constituency, and they have to connect to their base. And the constituency has to hold them to account. With respect, colleagues, I see too many people, too many representatives holding on to seats, and it's delaying the progress of the HIV response. Organizations. We can no longer continue as we are with different organizations. The response requires something different from us. Do we really need 4 or 5 networks of people living with HIV in a country in 2025? We have to think differently about this. So how do organizations, and it's hard discussions because it's about us, it's about our history, it's about our legacy, but how do organizations at the national level organize differently? There's been so much that's been invested in running these organizations, but governments and donors cannot sustain this model. So we can't go to the government and say, please support 5 networks of people living with HIV. Because what they're going to do, they're going to choose their favorite, the one who's required to support the government, and all the others are going to be excluded. So do national networks of people living with HIV need to merge into a different type of model? Or at least think about how you share costs, how you share back office costs, admin, HR, finance. You don't all need admin, HR, and finance departments. How do you share costs and do things differently? And then finally, the movement. GNP Plus isn't the office in Amsterdam. GNP Plus is all of us. It's the networks who belong to GNP Plus, and it's the networks who do not belong to GNP Plus. GNP Plus provides a voice to those who are connected and those who are not connected to the network. But how do we create that safe space to talk about the type of movement that we need? And this is a really difficult conversation. Because in 2026, 2027, do we really need GNP Plus, ICW, Global Network of Young People Living with HIV? The same challenge with all the networks of people living with HIV on the country level is the same challenge at the global level. It's an unsustainable model, and people living with HIV are suffering and are being paid a disservice. So I encourage all of us who belong to these networks or who identify these networks, create the space where these conversations for a different type of movement can take place, where the leaders and the custodians of the movement of people living with HIV come together and think differently. Because the HIV response demands that of us, and we all have a responsibility.
Which countries currently are responding to this need and this crisis. We are looking at countries, but also we need to also ask ourselves, how have we responded to this crisis? Because it's like we are waiting for something to happen in order to respond. But this is a crisis. So it means every day as we sit here, we are sitting in the middle of a crisis. We also need to understand which countries do we see that we can instantly leverage on or we need to find where those resources that people are being currently taxed is going, and how do we make sure those resources are also put into the health sector. A lot of our countries boast about minerals and wealth. How do we sustain the labor force within those mines to make sure they are living healthy lives? It means sometimes we need to learn from our history. I remember many years ago when companies were getting company policies for people living with HIV. Who remembers that? Companies were expected to avail certain days of the week where they will have a clinician coming in to test people and initiate people into treatment. And here we are with our Lamborghini with no longer tires, but perhaps no engine, but it's looking good. How do we make sure we design a whole new car, maybe not a Tesla, because people start boycotting about it. But we need to make sure whatever ideas we are going to bring, we should be thinking about the people back home, the child that is in the village who's likely to be affected, those of us who are aging with HIV who are going to be affected, and also the young people that I think yesterday we had examples of young people, the complaints that they are already making. Perhaps also they were used to seeing a Lamborghini, now you want them to take into a Corolla. You know, when you are a parent and you've lost your job and you have to downgrade, you know how children react. You can't take me to school, you can't show off with this car because they are used to a particular way of life. Now you need to orient them in a different way. As a funder, we are also going to be prioritizing what it is that we are going to be funding. And part of that is also to look at what advocacy agenda issues can actually leverage on some of the things that we are proposing here. Whether we are going to do integration or not, but for that to happen effectively, efficiently, and effectively, we need leadership. That is a clear agenda, a clear mandate, and that is representative of all the diverse people living with HIV, young, old, women, non-binary, whatever we come from, we need a collective voice. So I'm hoping that when we live here, even if we don't have 10 things, we can have at least 2 or 3 things that will say, as a collective, as GNP Plus, this is what we are going to invest in, and this is what we are going to push at global level, at regional level, and at national level, because we have lives to save and keep and sustain. And there are not 200, there are millions of people who are either going to default, who are going to start seeing drug resistance. We're not even talking about those that are going to take risk tomorrow, but we're talking about those that have been sustained by the gap that has been created. So it also means even the institutions, as funders who have remained in the sector, we are also going to change the way we've been working. So you also need to look out for those changes. Because if you go with the same attitude, we are likely to tell you, no, this is not how things are going to work. So we also need to use those existing relationships and partnerships that we have to reach out and say, how are you also changing? This is what we are doing, this is what we are offering, because you have all the expertise that you have gained in the last 40, 50 years of living with HIV. So we are not a lost cause, we are not beggars, but we just need to reprogram and re-strategize for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have 12 minutes for our 2 panelists. The last one, 6. I think now we need to have an interactive discussion. We need to allow the participants asking questions so that they should be responding the questions. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure I'll save a lot of time. First of all, my colleagues have really touched on most of the issues. So perhaps it's distilling more what is the take-home message. The first thing I wanted to say was from the Gates Foundation, really just to congratulate you for bringing everybody together here. That in itself, I think a big hand for yourselves.
Round of applause to all of us for being here.
Yeah.
Let us give us a round of applause to ourselves.
Yeah, because
Thank
you're
you.
recognizing the moment we're in and what needs to be done and some action, and that's great. But after all the talking, we will need the action. And personally, I came in here as Gates to hear what the action will be. Happy to sit here as a panelist, but really you are the response. So we came to hear from you and perhaps to guide you, nudge you in some direction if we feel maybe you're not focusing enough. But I think from what I've heard, the focus is there. The focus is there. The issues which have been touched on, I think that it's not a one-size-fits-all here. By region, I've heard that earlier even, and from the panelists. By country, and the countries that I think are most vulnerable are the ones that were most dependent on the donor funding. And it was a choice. Choices, some countries deliberately said, no, maybe these portions of our health system we should maintain and manage them. Others did not. So how do they pivot? How do they change now to respond where that support is no longer? Yeah, even if you lose your leg, you need a prosthesis or something to continue your work. A lot will need to be done at country level. And I think what Wiseka's saying and others are saying is you need to be present in those conversations. That's very important. At the same time, recognize that we shouldn't go back to vertical systems. We really have to strengthen our health systems to be integrated. We'll lose some things, we'll gain some things, and we also recognize that. But how do you go about that? And I think that's where the networks really have a key role to play in identifying appropriate interventions and advocating for domestic resources. That's why I heard your voice. Make noise. If you're not making noise, you won't be heard. And so when decisions are being made, it's so important what we read in the media informs how the donors respond. Very, very important. So your key messages, what are they, which you can all repeat? You should have those 5 messages which you leave with, that they'll hear it at global level, at regional, whatever. It's very powerful. But it should be made in a way to change and to drive the response now going forward. So that is what I would urge you to do. And as the Gates Foundation, we've always been very supportive of governments being in the driving seat. That's always been our model in supporting countries, in working with in the research agenda and so on, is to hand over to government to take over and roll out, knowing that there are other partners who support the development work. But we also have a role to play to work with you and to make sure that when you leave here, you can support the implementation in some way or the other. Thank you.
It's very rare that I'm given a mic to say something and I find my head is blank. But it is, to some extent. And partly because, hearing all the the discussions and the conversations throughout the last 2-3 days, I felt like, that mouse that runs in a wheel runs very, very, very fast, but it doesn't go anywhere. It just keeps going through the same spot. But it's running, but not moving. So, and I kept thinking to myself, have I found myself in that space where I'm always constantly running out of energy? Everybody sees that I am running, but running where to? And so I think this 2-3 days is really now just been a reflection to see how do we jump off that hoop and start moving forward. And I don't have that answer, of course, but some answers are beginning to emerge. But some of those discussions have been based on us being in that cycle, talking about the problems over and over and over, and repeating them, just using different words. And so what we're hearing from the donors, what we're hearing from multilateral leaders are saying, we need to think different. We need to package our what we do differently. We need to start thinking about how we work differently. We need to see how we can become attractive to other, for the current existing donors that are there, whether it's from industry, from, AIDS funds or Gates or people like that. How do we do that? And that's the conversation that we're going to need to take forward. Because what we do is so important, is so critical. If we were not there, and I've always said, look, just take for a minute, just, look at the counterfactual. If we were not there, if, Sean will tell you, if we were not there, cabotegravir may not have come to us quickly. If we were not there, we would probably still be drinking NNRTIs like efavirenz and so on. If we were not there, we would probably still be on D4T. If we were not there, but we were the ones making the demands. We want change. If we were not there, we would not have the human rights that we've enjoyed, even though they're so limited. We'll probably be in a worse space. But now, how do we package that and make ourselves look relevant and also be relevant for our communities? Because they're depending on us. We are the leaders, each one of us. So what I am hoping will happen after this meeting is how we get out of that loop. How do we form consortiums? Do we have to apply for 10 grants to VIV, to Gates, to AIDS funds? Or could we say, guys, we have the same vision, we have a problem with this issue. Zimbabwe, Malawi, Kenya, can we form a consortium and put a package together? So, just as one idea. Could we be thinking about shared costs, as Sean said? Guys, could we have one admin system that looks after our different resources? Even if it was independent from all of us, if we wanted to make sure that we felt that no one organization wasn't having an advantage. What I'm just saying is that we're going to have to shift in the way we think. But we also hope that, I think part of the other challenge that I think also exists, and I shared this in our group, I think on day one, is that we also don't want Jesuses to be receiving money on our behalf. Because I think that's also been a challenge, where we asked to have input in certain organizations, and we asked to attend meetings, and the money stays somewhere else. So how do we do that? And sometimes we may have to learn to say no. That's how we empower ourselves. So if you want me to come to your meeting, no. Because I think this money should be in my region, in my organization. So it's going to be a very complete shift. And I'm glad that the answers are beginning to emerge. But I can guarantee you, not just hearing what I've heard today, what I've been hearing, what we know is happening in America and all these other regions, in the Netherlands, in Germany, about reduction in resource availability. It's going to impact us, and if we don't want to change, we will perish. The message is as simple as that. So let's fight to keep the Global Fund going. At least we know that it's so relevant in keeping products, commodities, and secured, and so on. But we will not be able to compete with commodities. Even if we say, oh no, but reserve some money. She would not be able to say reserve some money for my community, even if she had a voice, because she will prioritize making sure babies have their pediatric drugs. You have your ARVs. People have malaria drugs, and so. Colleagues, friends, from today, let's resolve. When Florence and Sibyl leave this place, have a very clear package, as we've heard, where there's 2, 3, 4 clear messages about how we get out of that loop. That we are clear about it, and we are willing to make that change and that shift. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let us give a round of applause to our panelists, and also I'm applauding my panelists for keeping up to time. And I'm happy that all of you tackled on the opportunities existing, how to partner within networks and donors, and also how to help ourselves shape funding priorities as we go on from here. And this also went as far as on decisions going forward, and also that you're looking up to action. Because if you don't act, then why are we here? we keep on talking the same things. We have a generation ahead of us, generations to come. So we really need to take an action, and that is what is expected from here. This is not ending up here. So we need to have a very interactive session way forward, and I'll need now to pass on to the flow so that now we start asking questions, but I'll need 1 or 2 people to help me so that we should be able to identify 1, 2, 3s, and then once we do those 3, and then we'll be going questions to my panelists. So someone help me, yes? Yeah, thank you. The youth, where are you? I need to work with you. Okay, help me. So choose 3, the first 3, and let us, a plea to you all, let us be brief and straight to the question so that we have a lot of questions, please.
So I'll start with you. I'll go to the back, 1, then somewhere there in the middle. Yes, Inad. Sorry. Tariq, yes.
Yes, so in that sequence.
Yes.
Okay, so we only have 10 to 15 minutes on this, so let us be brief. 10 minutes. Let us please be, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I think let me thank all the presenters here for providing the way forward on how we respond as countries. I think for me, is there are some advices that we need to think about, to think differently anyway, and think about imaging or sharing cost. I think as country networks, we need to be realistic. It won't be an easy way to do, and we must be prepared about that, as much as it is a positive idea. I think a similar approach, it needs to be happening in our countries. We need to organize a similar session where we'll invite development partners, a private sector, government, and as networks, that will be an opportunity for us to present our advocacy agenda, our priorities, and we must be able to unpack those priorities so that they can be clear. And those priorities, they must be aligned to the priorities of the national government so that they can be easily be supported. Again, comrades, it will not be an easy path to go. So we need to be prepared. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's move to the next. That was, I think, comment or question.
I'm running.
So I have a question to Charles from UNAIDS. You say that the roadmap was well analyzed, and it's very evident that community representation is not there. For example, for Kenya, the roadmap was endorsed, but looking at the document, there's no community voices there. So what are the strategies as UNAIDS do you have to ensure that the document has community voices and has communities' interventions in it? Because this document is something that is meant to guide the government on HIV response beyond 2030. If community voices are not in this document, what does it mean for us as communities?
Hello, it's from my side, it's gonna not be a question, but more a reflection on the MENA region, so you can give me maybe more minutes, if it's possible. So I'm just to highlight the situation that you are navigating now in the most of regions of the world. We have been navigating this in 2010. We just received a very recent report made by civil society from the region with support of Frontline AIDS. And we highlight that since 2010, there is 85% gap of fundings in the region, okay? Knowing that the region is receiving only 1% from the global HIV responses budget. But within this situation, we try to navigate this problem. Every country has made its own model or practices. I will try to be brief. In this, to resolve that, we have been based on the NASA data, which is not available in all countries, but in countries where it's available, which is Jordan. So we have had some NASA transparency, and also in Jordan they explored a bit the private sector and also innovative models, such like the social impact bonds. We have also in Jordan, the UHC has played an important role. Then in Egypt, we don't have NASA data, but there is an engagement on the UHC and yes, in UHC law. It has also engaged some private, remains very slow in HIV prevention. Then in Morocco, we do have clear and transparent NASA data, including indicating better monitoring of HIV-related expenses. We also, in Morocco, there was a national work on the UHC, but we call it the Social Protection Financing Law. In Tunisia, they launched also the national UHC, which called the Healthcare Reforms in 2020. And then they have also, in Lebanon, they also started the UHC process, but it was stopped by the financial crisis. So just to tell you, what we have now, the result that we have now, the new infection since 2010 is plus 116%. But this process is still ongoing, and it's 15 years and still ongoing. So the idea is to show the key word here is really the UHC and the inclusion of HIV. And when I say UHC, and thanks to GNP Plus, in 2023, we make the first workshop on UHC, which was very new, yes. And since that moment, there is a huge engagement of the community in the UHC process. So the key is the UHC. Maybe it seems for many national networks something political that's discussed. It impacts us in the ground. So just to say, we are open at the MENA region to give practices. They are not the best. Life is not pink now, but we try to navigate. Just to notice that it's something that we can't do. The country is suffering from PEPFAR freezing. We can do this in 2 or 3 or 4 months. Maybe emergency solution, but provide a long-term process, which is 15 years now in the region and still struggling. Thank you.
Thank you for this. Be brief and straight to the point. We don't have much time. So we have had 3.
Yes.
Maybe can we have the responses, and then we also have another set. We are remaining with about 8 minutes only. So
Can
to
we
the
use your
panelists,
mic?
Charles, there was a question for you.
Yes.
Yeah, one question for Charles. The others, and there's reflections and insights. Okay, so let's continue. Anyone with a question? Let's go to
Another
questions.
round. I will
Another
start with
round,
my
yes.
Archbishop there.
Yes.
Can you come next? Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much.
Please be
Like I
brief
said,
and straight to the point.
4.
I appreciate.
4 is enough, right?
Yes, 4. Let's take 4
Okay.
for now. Yeah, thank you.
But we are already
We
close
need to have a break and then proceed with our agenda.
Yeah. Thank you very much. This is James Kamau from Ketam. Sean, we need drastic change in terms of how we are moving. And can GNP Plus move this so that, for example, we do an entry point and everything at the AU summit and the other, so that we get the governments, the African governments, to put up the money that is there, so that we don't lose. So we actually need to change our tack and do it quickly, come up with policy papers and get them to the ministers of health and finance of the countries, so that by the time we are getting to the AU, we have a common paper, because that, by the way, is the way to go. Global Fund has been doing a lot in terms of community funding. And usually it has been done through the CCMs of the countries and whatever it is. Sometimes it becomes disadvantageous to some community members, groups who do great work, but don't have the capacity to put it on paper in that particular. I think we need to look at that and give them, because it is what they do at the ground that goes on, that goes. And remember, it was the communities that brought access to ARVs and medicines.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Emmanuel Barare from WCC and Y Plus in Kenya. Now, I think for me, a question just goes to all the panelists in general. And I think we can all agree that in order for us to move forward, you've all talked about having a collective voice and a collective way forward in terms of us coming together. And now from my perspective, I feel like we really need to have a rally call in terms of budget advocacy, especially for each and every one of our governments. We do have particular thresholds that exist in terms of having an amount of money that should be catered for the health sectors in each and every government. If it's 15%, if you want to have it more than that percentage that it exists at the moment, then where can we advocate for the response within that particular threshold in the budget cycles that will be there, so that it can be included within the budgets that we want to see. And at the end of it all, the solution does lie with us having that collective voice, and I hope that we're able to do it together. Thank you.
Thank you. We move on to
From the
third
young
one.
person.
Okay.
Thank you. Still needed to introduce, or we can talk to us?
Just go ahead here.
Okay. Just question, and over the past few years, we have all done a lot of work to put issues such as gender equality and human rights in the agenda. And in this shifting funding context, what advice of strategies would you offer to help communities, organizations and networks adapt without compromission on core values like gender equality, inclusion on women's rights, especially when funding pressure? And different question, have reflected on how to address one of the long-standing challenges without communities: competition for limited resources between community, organization, and networks. Thank you.
Thank you. The last one.
That is to all panelists, right? It is to all the panelists.
Yes,
Good.
one will take that one, yes.
Then lastly to the
The last
Archbishop.
question, yes.
Vuzieka, I loved your comment on how the funding was terminated or freezed. Will there be in our communique out of this meeting something to show our discomfort about that? The paternalistic way of doing things that we could have really been told 3 months, 6 months, prepare yourselves, this is going to happen. Somewhere, is it somewhere? Somewhere you said, what advocacy agenda are we following? Could we structure our advocacy agendas in short term, intermediate, and long term? Because there are things that are happening in health whose causes are coming out of other areas that are not health. And they need time to tackle. Like the money being spent on toxic borders and internal conflicts. If there was something to be done on that, there is reconciliation, there is harmony. That money is enough. Toxic militaries, toxic bullies in the community leadership and spiritual, I am seeing it in my own sector, spiritual leadership, people who can't tolerate any other view. If we spent some resources there, there is money that could be saved. So that brings me to Sean's point. Are we should we just talk about systems integration, or should we now also talk about governance integration? So many things multiplied. 54 countries in Africa, each having an army. Who are you fighting? And who can how much money are we spending in military spending, that if we are Homo sapiens, this rather than fighting, and we get that money into health. So yes, for the short term, but for the long term, what things can be done together better if East Africa community had one integrated federal governance, or Africa Union by 2063 is fully integrated. So those are my 3 points.
Thank you very much, Bishop. Thank you. So my panelists, I know that you'll be brief and straight to the point. Let me start with Charles. There was a question direct to you, Sean, and then Sam in brief, and then the other panelists just also we also take up the questions. Then we proceed to have our tea. Thank you. Over to you, Sam. You can use this.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I want to start with domestic funding. For some are aware that there is the Abuja agreement, and countries decided they can at least put 15%. And we had in the presentations in the previous day that other countries have not even managed to do that. Only maybe 5 or so did. Maybe it's something to revisit and look, and maybe train young people on how that can work and what information they can access to that, because there have been trainings done around that. Then the other comment I wanted to make, it's also around gender equality and human rights. A lot of governments are becoming very conservative. That means conservatism also in their funding and where it should go. This also is being applicable to Africa when they talk about what family values looks like. That also means even in this response we are talking about, we are also going to see less and less money being allocated for community interventions that they might deem not appropriate to their own ways of traditional values that they look at. So it's also for us to look at which funders are funding some of that we can leverage on and push back. And the last comment I want to make in terms of funding and advocacy, we are also hoping as funders that we also look at multi-year funding, not just once off, that also sustain some of the advocacy gains that you are looking at, and also looking at some flexibilities, because I think that's important right now to look at what is working as things are quickly changing. How do we use that that type of the funding that you are receiving to also adapt to the changing than actually say you can't do this and do that? So we also need communities to really set clear priorities, but also making sure that they are flexible and adaptable to the changing environment.
Thanks, Amy. 2 quick points. Yes, the conversations are going to be difficult. I think the conversations have to be difficult. But as Sam said, we need to figure out how we serve people living with HIV and not just focus on serving organizations. And the response requires that. So I appreciate the conversations are going to be difficult, but that doesn't mean to say the conversations mustn't be had. And I agree that there is a need for longer-term sustainable funding, and it is something that we are looking at VIV Healthcare, trying to extend funding cycles from 1 year to 3 years, potentially 5 years. But we can't do that with the current architecture. So the architecture has to change. And then in terms of SADC and African Union, we need to figure out how we work with them better, because I think that those structures aren't being utilized effectively. I don't think people living with HIV have penetrated those sufficiently enough to hold them to account, because honestly speaking, I don't think they are accountable, and I think they do need to be more accountable. But I also think people living with HIV need to think about how we as a collective integrate ourselves, because I think that's part of the bigger challenge.
Let me start with the question on directly funding communities, the CCM challenges we have. So since there's been so much pressure on the Global Fund to think about how do we directly fund communities and not only look at the PR system, the sub-recipient mechanism, because it is not talking to community-led organizations. It's talking to big NGOs who have capacity to be able to get into the system. In fact, then once you get a PR, it subcontracts to the right organizations, but at a very low amounts. That's why the partnership with VIV has been really important for the Global Fund to learn how do you do it outside of the CCM. And it has worked, and Maxi maybe can say more about how Have Voice Fund works, because we have demonstrated with Have Voice Fund and Gender Equality Fund that you can do it, even within a Global Fund mechanism. But we want to go further than that, because it is not enough, because the biggest money is in the grants. Let's be honest, the biggest money is in the grants. You have to find a modality that works with the grants. If the PR is not the only way, should we maybe look at another relaxed type of PR that only targets community-led organizations, that drops a lot of these systems? We are looking at ways in which we could do it for GC8. So that's all because the mandate we've been given by the constituencies, look at another modality, becoming to GC8 with different types, with your assist to help us design what should that modality look like. If you know already that works, bring it. For example, we are looking at examples from Robert Carr Fund. We are looking at example of AIDS funds. We are looking at example of gender equality. We are looking at all these different examples. Will that work for the Global Fund? If it does, how do we make it work? But I say this now with a big pinch of salt. The Global Fund model works with countries. It prides itself in country ownership. And I'm saying this, again, with the country ownership piece, how will that modality work if we are centering countries, not centering Global Fund solutions from Geneva? What will that look like? I can't tell you sitting here. I can say we need to co-create what that will look like in this context with all the challenges we are facing now. So let's think deep about it. How should it look like today? Remember, not all countries have CCMs. Not all countries are funded directly. How should the modality look like for countries that don't have a CCM in a multi-country grant? How should that modality look like in countries that are transitioning out of the Global Fund? What should the limited remaining investment to communities in the countries that are going to transition? What should be the priority, whatever is left of the Global Fund in that country? We are getting in a very complex space because there will be those conversations happening this year. Comrade Gideon, I wish the US told all of us. I wish it told all of us that it's going to pull the plug or it's going to pull the rug under our feet. Then all of us would have prepared, including our governments. We were not prepared ourselves. All of us are not prepared. The freeze was applied to everybody, every institution, that there is a foreign assistance freeze for everybody for 90 days. It's no longer 90 days. It's more than for 90 days. What that practically means, if you had money, either through disbursement or it was still being signed, whatever that was in the pipeline in the system. That includes monies for UNAIDS. Many of our partners, their money is stuck, including some of the Global Fund money is stuck in the system. When the money is stuck in the system, the activities that were meant for that money, what must happen? Over and above, before they can release the money, they must do an assessment. With all the things that they've already mentioned online, what we will be assessed on. We all know what the Global Fund does is public information. Some of the things that we are doing are deemed questionable from the US, including our gender equality work, our human rights work. Part of it is going to be questioned. Now it's up to the Global Fund, what will it do? After it receives the results of the assessment, I can't tell you what will be the results looking like. But I can ask us as the movement to foresee and prepare. If we are going to integrate ourselves in a country national process, You better have your gender equality assessments and your human rights assessment ready to be integrated in the national response. If you don't have those, while UNAIDS is still here standing with us, get your assessments ready and integrate them in the national plans. Not all countries will integrate this. The anti-gender movement, the anti-human rights movement is more alive, in fact, more sponsored by the biggest donor in the world. They are up and alive. Even in the country where we are now, in Kenya, they might be having a conference next week, or maybe next month, I don't know. There are many others who will be having conferences in our countries. So in the context of a shrinking civic space, in the context of attacks on human rights, that's why you are needed in those meetings. That's why when the health budget of your country, Mlulek in South Africa, if you are not in the room, don't expect government to be looking out for key populations, because you are not present in the meeting. If you are not present, Jake, in the meeting, expecting adolescent young women and girls' health to be centered, and you are not in the meeting, then we can't expect it. We need to be in the room and stay long enough in those conversation countries to prioritize our priorities in the integration, but be flexible that we live in difficult times. I don't think I'm going to be able to answer all questions. I had an offering to my comrade at ICA that maybe some of the things that we need to think about in the room. There's a thing in Africa called stockfells. I don't know if it's present in Asia and other regions. Stockfells is pooled funding. You bring your $100, the other person brings $100, the other person. How do we leverage stockfells to fund the movement? How can we leverage stockfells? How can the networks use that pool funding to sustain itself, to think of advocacy, the government? Have we thought about social enterprises? Those are things we did in the beginning when we didn't have money. Why can't you own this hotel and sell the seats and the beds to other people who have money? Viv, when they come to Kenya, use the community hotel. In that way, we generate income. Government is not going to give us everything. They have also priorities. They too are fighting over budgets for other public health policies who are also underfunded in education and social welfare. We are not going to be prioritized because we were prioritized by PEPFAR. We are no longer exceptional. We are no longer different than other people who are struggling with non-commodities, with non-communicable diseases. We are now going to stand in the queue competing with many, many, many other problems in our countries. In fact, NCDs will be first in the list. We'll probably be number 10. In anticipation of that, what are we going to do? What's our plan B and our plan C? Government can't be our plan all. We have to have another plan. Those people who are sitting in this chair must contribute to the movement. A subscription fee or $100 every year to sustain the movement. We can't say the things we are saying and don't put money on it. But you steal our money, we're going to hold you accountable. As we're holding government accountable. I am asking us to go deep to those level of details and leave this room feeling, I have something to contribute. I don't have millions, Mina, but I may have $100. So those are some of the things we need to think about.
Thank you very much, Vui, for summarizing it all. And because we're far behind time, Charles will just give you a minute and to sum up, to final, just respond. 1 minute, please, so that we can close the session.
Thanks very much, my sister. It's always hard to speak after Vu. We've provided guidance. We have a bit of more details and what opportunities are there to really get the sustainability roadmaps to have all the voices, because as we know, we offered guidance. We can't be paternalistic to countries, but we know in all the working groups there were members from all the constituencies. We've been very clear with who should be around the table, but it comes to the point that Sean kept raising around representation. When you represent communities on the working group, how do you voice the voices of the community? And that's a question we are able to really, because I, Melissa, and my colleague who works in the country responsible for Kenya, Ludfin, will be in the room. We're happy to talk through and support where you think we need to do better. We know part B, where the transformation actions need to be defined clearly, is coming up in many countries. Let's engage. We will be able to go past this moment. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let us give a round of applause to the panelists as they move back to their seats. We can continue the interactions with them as we go ahead with the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a great discussion. Now we move to grape tea.
Of a preamble about what it is you're doing in your groups. So you're going into your community focus. So I think all we are talking about here would serve all people living with HIV. But people living with HIV networks, if you can stay, those who are not young or are not women living with HIV focused networks, it would be